Been busy out there. I've been busy out there, online and elsewhere. Also, preparing for the program, because there's so much going on in America. And I wanted to talk to you about the civil service system. Oh, my God. Can you imagine, Mr. Producer, starting off with this? Oh, I'll make it interesting. Several decades ago, ladies and gentlemen, there was a special law passed, I think it was in the 40s. And that law was passed to give congressional staffers a special privilege. And the congressional staffer would be able to get career civil service jobs if their House member or Senate member was defeated, and not just get career civil service jobs without going through a typical process, but they get at the front of the line. And Democrat and Republican senators and congressmen for decades use this so-called perk for staffers, and so they would insinuate themselves, they'd secrete themselves into the bureaucracy. That's what they would do. Now, this is many years ago, so you can imagine what would be happening, right? You can imagine what would be happening today. The Democrat majority in the Senate, their staffers would be trying to weasel themselves, squirrel themselves into the bureaucracy, right? But that stopped because Congress passed a law and withdrew it after decades. That's because yours truly and Landmark Legal Foundation made a big stink about this. I testified before committees of Congress, in the Senate and the House, and I demanded that this absurd special privilege be denied to these members of the House and the Senate. And so, they literally reversed the law, and they can't get in that way anymore. Very, very important as I think about the transition of power that's been taking place right now. Very, very important. I don't know what made me think about it, but I just read an article, I guess, that was talking about such things, and I said, wait a minute, I remember when this took place, so I thought you'd want to know just a little inside politics. As I said, there's a lot going on today, but I want to talk about something else. There's this constant reporting, even now, and propaganda about the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza. Of course some have suffered. There's no question about it. I recommend that they elect a new body. But there's Tim Kaine on CNN today. He's not the only one. Other Democrats in the media. UK attacking, again, the Israelis, because, attacking the Israelis is an excuse for attacking Jews, and it's going on all the time. But there's something you need to know. There's a think tank in Britain that's called the Henry Jackson Society. And Henry Jackson, if it's the Henry Jackson I'm familiar with, was a Democrat senator from the state of Washington. He was very patriotic. He was very pro-union and pro-defense. And he's a big supporter of the United States military, big supporter of the Vietnam War at the time, a big supporter of the State of Israel. So they pulled together last month. They pulled together some of the top scholars in existence to take a look at this issue about the Gaza death toll. Now, others have done this too. We've talked about it. We've done those reports. But this really is the report of reports. And I posted the report earlier today on my various social sites. But it was summed up last month in the Times of Israel UK think tank Gaza death toll inflated to defame Israel for targeting civilians. This isn't some Jewish group. It's not a Jewish organization. They said the Palestinian death toll for the Gaza war appears to include thousands of people who died of natural causes, as well as incorrect figures, partly in an effort to inflate the toll of women and children, according to a report by a British think tank released last month. International media outlets are too quick to accept the figures from terror group Hamas that are being manipulated for propaganda needs, the Henry Jackson Society said. The Gaza Health Ministry under Hamas, reports to Hamas, was created by Hamas, and I quote, has systematically inflated the death toll by failing to distinguish between civilian and combatant deaths, over-reporting fatalities among women and children, even including individuals who died before the conflict began, the report said. And they have this chapter and verse, all the information, the great details. They said this has led to a narrative where the Israeli Defense Forces are portrayed as disproportionately targeting civilians, while the actual numbers suggest a significant proportion of the dead are in fact combatants. The research was carried out by the volunteer-based 50 global research group supported by the International Institute of Social and Legal Studies. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says that 44,000 people in the Strip have been killed or are presumed dead in the fighting so far, a toll that cannot be verified and that does not differentiate between civilians and fighters. Israel says it seeks to minimize civilian fatalities and stresses that Hamas uses Gaza's civilians as human shields, fighting from civilian areas including homes, hospitals, schools, and mosques. By the way, the head Islamo-Nazi in Gaza of Hamas just said, yes, it's true, we use hospitals that way. They admit these things now. Some 5,000 Palestinians listed by Hamas as war dead, in fact, died of natural causes, including cancer patients. They tracked down the names, who later appeared on a list of those still receiving medical care. In addition, most of the reported fatalities were men between the ages of 15 and 45, with many of their ages lowered by a year by this so-called Hamas health group when compared to the Palestinian population register, in an apparent effort to make it seem that more minors are being killed. Research report author Andrew Fox wrote, this misclassification contributes to the narrative that civilian populations, particularly women and children, bear the brunt of the conflict, potentially influencing sentiment and media coverage. He said the age demographic aligns closely with the expected profile of combatants, further supported by spikes in deaths of men, reported by family sources rather than hospitals. The think tank said the toll also includes Gazans killed by terrorists, errant rocket, or while food aid is being distributed, including in the case of a 17-year-old who was reportedly shot dead by Hamas last September while waiting to get food for his family. They counted that as a casualty from the IDF. It said other problems have included adults recorded as children and several men listed as women, though the system was later rectified, leading to a significant improvement in terms of corrected data. They reported a 22-year-old as 4-year-old, a 31-year-old as an infant, as just two examples. The study found the methodology of data collection by the so-called Ministry of Health is not scientifically valid, and that its reports from previous conflicts have also concealed combatant deaths. Now remember, America, this is important because this is what's used by our media, by Bernie Sanders and the Democrats, by the Arabs, by the Palestinians, by so-called mediators and negotiators. The lies. The organization noted that Israeli and U.S. military intelligence estimate that of the total casualties, 17,000 were Hamas fighters, but that the statistic is often missing from international media reports. The omission creates a skewed narrative portraying all casualties as civilians, shaping public opinion and international policy based on incomplete or manipulated data. This is like the ICC. It listed a number of outlets that faulted on the issue, including the BBC, the New York Times, and CNN. While 98% of the media outlets reviewed used the Hamas casualty figures, only 5% cited figures from Israeli authorities, it found. It also found that less than 1 in every 50 articles noted that Gaza Health Ministry figures were unverifiable or controversial. On the other hand, Israeli statistics, quote, had their credibility questioned in half of the few articles that actually incorporated them. Ambassador Hussam Zamlat, the head of the Palestinian mission to the United Kingdom, rejected the findings, telling the UK's Telegraph newspaper that numerous international organizations and UN agencies have confirmed the numbers. Spokesman for the BBC told The Guardian it's challenging to report accurately on the death toll in Gaza. And it goes on. Let's see here. Yes, okay. I thought you'd want to know. Now, in Israel, I don't think many people, you do, but many other people in the media understand how their government actually works, or in some cases doesn't work. The prime minister is not a president. He's not a military dictator like in Egypt. He's not a monarchical inbred like most of the Middle East. He's not an Islamist terrorist dictator. In Israel, their governmental system is very confusing and complex and actually quite idiotic. But it is what it is. That's the way it was set up by these socialists who set it up from Europe. You have 120 Knesset seats. It's a quasi-parliamentary system. And, of course, the prime minister comes out of the Knesset. So you need to have at least 61 seats in order to run the government. It's not an executive branch per se. It's an entity that grows out of the legislature, the Knesset, as it grows out of the parliament in Britain and all the rest of Europe, pretty much. Now, the problem in Israel is like the problem in Italy. You look at England, for instance, they have 3 major parties, the Tory party, the Labour party, the Liberal party, the 2 biggest being Labour and Tory. But in Israel, you have really scores of parties. Same with a country like Italy. And so the problem for Netanyahu is the Likud party is the biggest party, and they have the most Knesset members, so he has the most votes in that regard. But they have to build a coalition with other parties, minority parties, to get to 61 or more. And Netanyahu has done that, and he's been the longest-serving prime minister in the history of Israel. Now, he hasn't been the prime minister continuously throughout, but for a big chunk, he has been. So they have to build these coalitions. Now, you can have a party that's a member of the Netanyahu government that has 6 seats in the Knesset. That's 5% of the seats. Or you can have that party that has 6 seats and another party, maybe a religious party, they have 7 seats. That's 13 seats. And that might be enough to bring down your government if they don't go along with you on a particular major vote, whether it's the budget, judicial reform, or a national security / foreign policy issue like the one involving Hamas. So when Donald Trump sends this guy, Stephen Whitlock, who's got enormous ties to Qatar, I'd love this man to come on my program, to negotiate, and to negotiate with, among others, Qatar and, of course, Israel and so forth. When they're putting this pressure on Netanyahu, Netanyahu has to convince his cabinet. These are members of his cabinet. And so tonight, one party said, we're out of here. And they took their 6 votes and they left. There's another party threatening to do the same thing. So when Netanyahu is trying to deliver for the incoming administration, it could cause his entire government to collapse in the middle of a war. That's how it's working over there right now as I speak.